Imagine a village on a hill where each home is built on different levels, some easy to reach, some hidden away, accessible only to a few. For generations, people thought this was just the way things were, that each person's place was set by the height they could climb. But one day, a woman named Ira Singhal arrived and questioned why only certain paths were open, why only some heights were attainable. As India's first differently abled woman to top the civil services exam, Ira didn't just defy expectations, she redrew the entire landscape. Inclusivity, she would show us, isn't just the absence of barriers, it's the presence of bridges. It's the belief that a society is whole only when everyone can access every path. In this podcast, Ira shares a story that reminds us that real inclusion is more than about creating spaces. It's about reshaping the very structures that define who we can become.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to ValueMetrics.tv, powered by ValueMetrics, where we speak to extraordinary leaders who are transforming our country. The theme of today's podcast is Thought Evolution, where we'll be discussing about overcoming limiting beliefs for personal and professional growth. Our today's guest is Ms. Ira Singhal. Ira is the first person with disability to top the prestigious Civil Services Examination 2014. She's currently working on improving the education indices in schools of Arunachal Pradesh by launching detailed classroom teaching plans. If this is not the guest to speak to, then who is? Welcome, Ira. We are so excited to have you with us today. Thank you so much. So, Ira, before we even delve into some interesting topics, one thing that we would love to understand is that what is your current take on the state of inclusivity and accessibility, even when you talk about physical spaces or digital spaces? Where do you feel that we are as a country? And what is your vision? And what do you think is the roadmap? And where should we exactly be down the line?
In the last, I would say 7 to 8 years, there's been a lot of noise and a lot of awareness about these issues. But when it comes to actual ground implementation, it's not happened as fast and as widespread as we would like. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, we're a country with a huge shortage of space. So what happens is when you're thinking inclusive and accessible buildings, it's very tough because they need more space, and it's very tough to sort of do that in the kind of availability of space that we have. Yes, of course, we've even getting elevators fixed into buildings, it's a tough thing. One, new buildings that are coming up, yes. At least all the public buildings are now coming up as accessible buildings. So that's a very, very good thing. But then we have tons of old infrastructure. And it's very tough to sort of modify that into accessible infrastructure. So when you get ramps that are built, they're at this angle, which basically you can't walk on, let alone have a wheelchair go on. So we are having those issues right now. But at least for anything new that is coming up, it's coming up as accessible infrastructure. So that's excellent.
We have this really bad habit of constantly comparing our own country's infrastructure with the West. That, okay, this is what happens in Europe, this is what happens in US, but we never consider there's a drastic difference in the population of those countries versus ours. And to ensure that, of course, while we talk about inclusivity, to make sure that everybody has access to even these facilities becomes a challenge. But I'm sure that, we are headed in the right direction. And Ira, you specifically also mentioned, we heard that in your bio, that you have been also working around inclusivity in the classroom space as well. For example, introduction to sign languages and ensuring that people with different abilities and disabilities feel equal in the same space. Can you please shed some light in that area and what all work is being currently done?
So, people who are hearing disabled, I think you'll see the least number of hearing disabled people in your regular society. And the biggest reason is communication. See, to participate in a social activity, you need to be able to communicate. Now, these are people who cannot communicate simply because they don't speak, and they have issues with hearing. And we've been teaching them a language which we didn't teach to anybody else. So the only people we're telling them to communicate with is the other people like themselves. which leads to further exclusion. So I thought that let's start from the kids. Let's make it a compulsory language in schools, and that's the only way things get done. You may not learn the whole language, but you will at least learn basics, so you can do the basic interaction, which is what you would possibly need in a regular environment. I realized that unless we have a classroom where kids with all kinds of abilities and disabilities study together, we will never actually have inclusion. The one thing that needed to be done was not convince the kids. It was convincing the school authorities. It was convincing the teachers and the principals and all the school management that there isn't really much that you need to do as an extra effort to include this child in your classroom.
No, that's actually a very valid point because, in order to create any kind of behavioral change, it all starts with the mindset first. So first you change the mentalities and then you go up to changing behaviors. So it's a natural course or transition that people have to go through.
Now, I absolutely agree to your point of view where you're trying to shift mindset in the classroom, in the physical space to make it more inclusive. Let's delve a little deeper into education when it comes to a digital space. And not just education, in terms of accessing any kind of content online. We have seen that not every website or not every platform is AAA graded. It's difficult for people
Right.
with disabilities to access that kind of content. So do you also see any shifts in the digital space, specifically in the education space?
Our physical classrooms were tough for everybody, but digital classrooms are a little easier on at least the orthopedic disabilities, which is, and yes, there would be trouble for hearing and visual, but when it comes to ortho, that makes it easier for them. But yeah, the bigger thing was that there was no accepted standard of accessible websites. So I think the bigger work that has been done has been on creating those standards, creating those guidelines, and now it's just about implementing them. And the good thing is, within the digital space, it's easier to implement. It can be much faster. We haven't really focused on it, and I think mainly because we're still not using digital media of education as much within our education environment, and I think that's the reason that this hasn't been focused as much. We still mentally think of this regular classroom and regular school and college to really get our education. So till we start thinking in those terms, we won't be focusing so much on this. But now at least we have the standards, and we can, whenever we start something, we can start from that.
And Ira, I really love that there are some of the initiatives that are also challenging the existing pedagogies as well. For example, introduction to entrepreneurship, introduction to workshops which focus on making you job ready and which is more focused on skill development. So sort of the focus is shifting from purely teaching to mentoring. So the students can
Yes.
also, figure out their own niches
Yes.
and they can grow in that direction. Like our age-old Gurukul approach, I think is coming back, where we are able to give students space to explore their own original ideas. So just talking about that change in the pedagogies, I would love to know more about these extra trainings and entrepreneurship and these initiatives that you have been working upon.
I personally think that it's not the lack of education which makes our children unemployable. It's the lack of skills to market themselves and to really fit into the work culture, which hampers their participation. And for a place like Arunachal, where there is not much of private sector available, which can kind of teach you those skills, and kids here don't have that much on ground exposure, which a child in Delhi will have. So for example, a child in Delhi, just by existing in Delhi, gets to learn so many things, but a child studying in my university here does not have the same experiences. There has to be someone giving that employment as well.
Do you also see that there's a space for a startup ecosystem to come into the play and strengthen this ecosystem further? Do you see a space where these new startups who are either working in the space of disability or education or just creating a general infrastructure can co-create something with you?
Absolutely, but the problem is it might not be that financially lucrative for a startup to sustain, instead of a place which has such a widespread and lower technical infrastructure as well.
So do you see that the possibility of creating more social focused or social entrepreneurship and social businesses flourishing and being developed within Arunachal Pradesh?
That's precisely what we're aiming at and what we're wanting to have as an achievement. That local people create businesses for local people. They will obviously we want customers from outside as well, but they should be sustainable within the local economy as well.
Correct.
However, I also want to draw a contrast between the Indian ethos, our education practices, and the empathy in our education system, as compared to the West. We have seen, for example, gun violence in the US, and we see that there's not the space is not as inclusive in some other European countries where people do not really have the liberty to express their religious beliefs. So I would love to know your thoughts around what really causes that, and what do you feel can be done to make sure that that can be countered.
The society there is very different from ours. We are a community based society. So here we have ties that bind us to people around us. So for example, we have people who have similar religion, similar history, similar culture, similar way of thinking around us, and hence we have a social reputation which affects our life, and we care about what others think of us, because that decides our participation into the economic, social, and political sphere. So if you commit a crime here, your nani, chachi, dadi, bua, their kids, their all lives get affected, right? They all get it's that in fact, that social pressure is a huge reason that we get lesser people committing crimes.
Do you feel that this community driven thought process can further help us strengthen our startup ecosystem, and if yes, then how do you see this kind of thought process guiding the existing culture of startups in our country?
So absolutely, because when you're talking of a startup in India, you must bring in the element of how that will affect my participation in the society. So if it makes me get more opportunities in terms of my social acceptance, I would obviously be more open to it. I was just saying that the Spotify family plans and the Netflix family plans, they work much more in India than they do elsewhere, I would say, because we work in a social fabric system. We think of, I'm going to be having access to this. Will my sister have it? Will my dad have it? Our automatic thought is, oh, I'm doing this, I should also have my dad or my sister or my brother or my mom have this. So I mean, if you recognize that opportunity, you can really expand your business like that.
You have accomplished so much, and you have fought so many issues, and there's so much, of course, I'm sure there's a lot more for you to do in the pipeline as well. But you've constantly fought these limiting beliefs, and you've constantly stayed ahead of these limitations that have been put across. I would love for you to either share some pearls of wisdom or share your thought process in terms of how us as entrepreneurs who constantly fight these battles where we are often disheartened, where we often lose, and they're definitely crest and troughs. How can we as individuals learn from your experiences and fight these limiting beliefs for not just professional, but also our personal growth?
You can't constantly expect the world to change. Somewhere you have to change yourself and fix what you can do about every situation, and again learn that some battles are worth fighting for, but then don't pick every battle, because if you divert your energy in too many areas, you will lose out. And if you really believe something, and that's why we're an emotional country, we will also need to detach ourselves from our emotions and be able to look at a situation realistically. So look at each situation, decide whether that's a battle that's worth fighting. Gather your resources, because that's another thing that we don't do. We don't gather every resource available to us. We get emotional about what resources we want to use and what resources we're going to exploit. But don't do that. Gather all your resources, and then have a plan A, B, C ready for every situation. That's another thing we don't do. We don't have a plan B or a C, because we always want to succeed without recognizing that that may not be possible, simply because of the way the world is structured. It's not in our hands. It's not something that we can control. But just because of the way the world is structured, there would be a plan B or a C needed. And I think if you can do it like that, there will be definitely more successes than we currently have.
Any parting thoughts, Ira, that you would like to extend?
I hope we become a country of job givers more than the job seekers.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ira, for joining us today and being a part of this experience.
We are really, really grateful for your participation, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon on some other interesting topics.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.